There we go. Well, welcome everyone to tonight's live stream. I'm going to be taking your questions. It is another Ask Me Anything. It's about 7:04 p.m. Eastern Time here in Fonthill, Ontario, in the Niagara region of Canada. My name is Dan Calcagno. I run MessianicNiagara.com and the YouTube channel associated with it. And if you don't know, I also am a pastor of a church here in Fonthill called Glad Tidings Church of God. And with the current COVID-19 situation, I am having to find ways of staying in touch with the people of my church, but also trying to branch out, try to learn how to live stream and connect with more people and try to grow, the audience that I have on this YouTube channel and for people who might check out some of the material that's on MessianicNiagara.com and also our church website, GladTidingsChurchOfGod.com. Officially, the two are not related, other than I run both in a sense. But I believe there is a sort of built-in audience on the YouTube, on the Messianic Niagara YouTube channel and the website, because that's been around for longer, and there are certain videos that one in particular has gone viral, and so I believe that there are people out there who would like to have their questions answered. In fact, my hope is that tonight we will at least answer some of the questions that people left after the live stream on Monday night. We didn't have any questions during the live stream, but there were a couple people who left live stream. Hey, there we go. We have, it's good to see Anna there. I'm going to answer your question that you had left last time. And there's somebody, I'm very sorry, I don't know how to pronounce your name, but Bavensky, do you believe all foods have been made clean? That's a great question. So you know what? I'm going to go ahead and answer that question first. Since you're on right now watching, I want to be able to answer your question while you're watching and listening. So all food, do you believe all foods have been made clean? And I think you're alluding to a passage in Mark chapter 7 in which it says, in fact, I'm going to go ahead and share the BibleGateway.com screen that I have up right now so we can look at it together. I think that'll work. I hope that'll work. So let's see here. So we're going to go to Mark chapter 7. I'm going to, for now, use the New American Standard Bible, which is just the translation that I probably trust the most. It's not a perfect translation, but it is literal. And so we're going to go to this passage. I think it's right here at the beginning where it says that the Pharisees and some of the scribes gathered around him, and when they had come from Jerusalem, and had seen that some of his disciples were eating their bread with impure hands. So now this is very, very important. They're eating bread, and they were eating it with impure hands. That is unwashed, it says. And it says, for the Pharisees and the Judeans, a better translation would be Judeans. We're talking about people who live in the region of Judea. They do not eat unless they carefully wash their hands, thus observing the tradition of the elders. And when they come from the marketplace, they do not eat unless they cleanse themselves. And there are many other things which they have received in order to observe, such as the washing of cups and pitchers and copper pots. The Pharisees and the scribes asked Jesus, why do your disciples not walk according to the tradition of the elders, but eat their bread with impure hands? Now, this is interesting. They're asking whether or not, why don't Jesus's disciples, ritually wash their hands before they eat bread. So they're not even talking about clean meats versus unclean meats, right? Leviticus chapter 11 and the issue of which animals are kosher or not kosher. That's not the question. The question is, why wasn't the disciples washing their hands before eating bread, which was a tradition, something that, even to this day, Orthodox Jewish people ritually wash their hands before they eat bread. It's my understanding of it, and I could be wrong, is that it's not a requirement of the Torah per se. It is something that the priests would have done. And even back then, when the temple was still standing, a lot of the Pharisees and some of the more observant Jews would have taken on that practice in order to enhance their holiness, so to speak, to be even holier in their practice. It wasn't necessarily necessary, but it was something that was commonly accepted, and certainly today is accepted all across the Orthodox world. Now, Jesus is not. It's funny because I don't think he's defending. He's neither defending them or condemning his disciples. He simply then uses this opportunity, this criticism that they had of his disciples, to then teach about something else. And so let's go back to that. Let's take a look at it. Let me just make sure what is being shared. Okay, so where are we here? He says, Jesus said to them, rightly did Isaiah prophesy of you hypocrites, as it is written, this people honors me with their lips, but their heart is far from me. But in vain they do worship me, teaching as doctrines the precepts of men. And then Jesus said, neglecting the commandment of God, you hold to the traditions of men. And look, I don't know exactly why he chose to quote that verse and to say that to them in response to their criticism of the disciples not washing their hands. I think and again, you have to always remember the context in which he spoke. This is an ongoing debate of what is the right approach that the Jewish people are supposed to take when it comes to the Torah. And so it's possible that Jesus is not even like downplaying ritually washing your hands before eating bread. I don't even think that's the issue. I think he's just using this as an opportunity to say, yeah, you guys are so concerned. You particular Pharisees here are so concerned with my disciples not ritually washing their hand before eating bread. But you guys are the ones who are neglecting, as he says in another place, the weightier matters of the Torah, things that have to do with compassion and faithfulness and things like that. So he goes on to say in verse 9, he was also saying to them, you are experts at setting aside the commandment of God in order to keep your tradition. For Moses said, honor your father and your mother, and he who speaks evil of father or mother is to be put to death. But you say, if a man says to his father or his mother, whatever I have that would help you is korban, that is to say, given to God, you no longer permit him to do anything for his father or his mother, thus invalidating the word of God by your tradition, which you have handed down, and you do many things such as that. So again, he's not even really talking about the issue of ritually washing your hands before eating bread. What he's saying, he's using this as an opportunity to criticize them and say, yeah, you criticize my disciples for that, but you guys do something much worse. So that's not okay. So then the issue gets we further focused as he continues on, but I just want to double check the stream. I don't know if it says how many people are watching necessarily, but I'm hoping that you guys are still watching and the person who asked this question is still watching. But I also just want to make sure that people on my Facebook page are able to watch. Or you know what? I have to bear with me just for a quick second, please. Just a quick second. I will answer the question, and I will get to the other questions as well. Okay. I want to make sure that everybody is aware of this live stream, so I'm just going to post it to my Facebook page. and to the Messianic Niagara Facebook page as well. There we go. Okay, let's get back to the text here. Mark chapter 7. Mark chapter 7, he says to the crowd, listen to me, all of you, understand. There's nothing outside the man which can defile him if it goes into him, but the things which proceed out of the man are what defile the man. If anyone has ears to hear, let him hear. So I think what he's doing here, and correct me, anyone can correct me if I'm wrong, of course. I think what he's doing here, he's saying, look, moral corruption doesn't come from outside, it comes from inside. He's not really even talking about ritual purity. He's talking about the issue of moral purity and what is most important. And so because he's doing that, I don't know if there's even a way to know for sure what his declaration on, again, ritually washing your hands before eating bread. That it's not even the issue of clean and unclean meats, right? Let's continue on. We're going to get to that verse. The verse in question, of course, is going to be in verse 19, but 17, he said, his disciples questioned him about this parable. And he said to them, are you lacking in understanding also? Do you not understand that whatever goes into the man from outside cannot defile him, because it does not go into his heart, but into his stomach and is eliminated? Get that? I think and then in brackets, it's thus he declared all foods clean. Thus he declares all foods clean. What does that have to do with all foods are not clean? The Torah does not declare that all foods are clean, and Jesus the Messiah would not contradict that. Certainly people assume he contradicts the Torah all the time, but as the perspective that I take is that Jesus not only doesn't contradict the Torah, he doesn't need to, because there's no reason to read this text as that. Again, look what he says, that which proceeds out of the man, that is what defiles the man. So again, he's saying this. It's not ritual purity that's important. It's what comes out of you. It's the moral purity of the heart that's important. It's almost as if he's saying, oh my goodness, we don't need to worry, like this rich idea of ritually washing your hand and what is and isn't ritually pure. Guys, it's not what's most important. It's like you're in some kind of crisis situation and people are dealing with some trivial matter when there's something way more important going on. And that's what Jesus, I think, is doing here. But why would it say, thus he declared all foods clean? And that's not even Jesus saying that. That's supposedly Mark is saying that. Okay, let's look at Mark chapter 7, verse 19, but let's look in the Young's literal translation, which is probably the most literal English translation that's out there. It doesn't say, because it does not enter into his heart, that is the food, but into the belly and into the drain it does go out, purifying all the meats. That's Old English for food, purifying all the food. So even the Young's literal translation is doing something there where it's purifying. I think, as far as I understand, the Greek is not perfectly understood exactly what was meant. And I forget which translation sort of gets at the real sense of it. I'm not sure. Let's see how N.T. Wright translated it. Result, all foods are clean. Yeah, I'll have to look into it and find out which translation had perhaps the more accurate. Let's see, let's go to studylight.org. Lots of different people go to lots of different ways of getting to the original languages. This just happens to be my favorite way of doing it. It's just the one I'm used to. So you go to Mark 17:19, you click on Strong's interlinear so that you can then look at the actual Greek, and you can see we have three words that are actually Greek, or translations of the Greek. Declared, to make clean. Okay. Okay. Well, I'm not entirely sure how to answer the question. It's something that I have studied before. It's been a while. I'm going to stop sharing and come back. Here it is in a nutshell. This verse is, you would really, I'm not a Greek expert. Believe me, I'm not a Greek expert. I know how to interact with the Greek a little bit, but we would need somebody who's a real Greek expert and doesn't have a huge bias against a positive view of the Torah. And so, let me see if there is any articles out there that might answer that question. Okay. Well, you know what I'm going to do? Thank you for asking that question. My tentative answer, my answer for now is this passage is not saying that there is no more distinction between kosher and unkosher food or meats. It's not about that, and the passage as a whole is not about that. The verse in 19, the section of verse 19 that says he declared all foods clean, that's something I'll have to look into more deeply and get you a good answer on that. So the next time I do a live stream, which will be soon, I'll try to answer that question a little better for you. But here's the thing. The kosher laws of Leviticus 11 and many other places, you have to ask, to whom did God give those commandments? God gave that to the nation of Israel as holiness commandments, if you will. They're part of the Jewish identity markers. They are a part of the commandments that are signs that indicate that you are a part of, legally a part of Israel. And so when Gentiles became a part of the faith, especially in Acts 15, we were not like the apostles decided that we are not obligated to the same exact same set of commandments that Jewish people are, especially Jewish people who live in a legal Jewish community. So what I encourage people to do is to understand that when you're in the context of Jewish people and Jewish believers, that issues of kosher certainly become relevant and something that you need to take seriously to one degree or another. I can't decide for you, what you need to do in your life. If you are in a completely Gentile Christian context or a completely Gentile non-Christian context, it has to be a personal decision. It has to be something between you and God, something in your own walk. And I don't believe we have the right to condemn or make people feel like they're not godly if they choose not to keep kosher in that way. So, but it's not as a result of Jesus's teaching. Jesus did not teach that the kosher laws are irrelevant, and I don't think the apostles taught that the kosher laws are irrelevant, but they might not be applicable to Gentile believers in every situation. And certainly with 2,000 years of Christian history and church history, it's difficult to even make that choice to want to do it all together. So we'll leave it at that. As you can see, I can be pretty long-winded. Let me get to some of the other questions. Let's see if anyone else. Okay, Thomas Brisbane, thank you so much for asking that question. You actually were able to ask it after the fact, so I had it here listed, but I'm glad that you're watching again and you've asked it again. You are quoting Acts chapter 2, verse 33, or you reference it rather. So let's just take a quick look at that. Go to Bible Gateway, just happens to be my favorite site to look up Bible scriptures. Acts 2:33. I'll bring it back onto the screen. Okay. It says this. Having been exalted to the right hand of God, that is Jesus, having been exalted to the right hand of God, and having received from the Father the promise of the Holy Spirit, he has poured forth this which you both see and hear. Let's look at the context a little greater. Okay, we're at the day of Pentecost, the Shavuot event, in which God pours out his Holy Spirit upon the apostles and upon the disciples. Peter is speaking and he's saying, men of Israel, Jesus the Nazarene, a man attested to you by God with miracles and wonders and signs, which God performed through him in your midst. This man, delivered over by the predetermined plan and foreknowledge of God, you nailed to a cross by the hands of godless men, that is the Romans, and put him to death. But God raised him up again. So, brothers, I say confidently to you that David did die and was buried. And so because he was a prophet, and then he knew that God had sworn to him, and I spoke about this the last on Monday night when I was talking about the promises to David about the Messiah, that one of his descendants would be on his throne. He looked ahead and spoke of the resurrection of the Messiah, that he was neither abandoned to the grave nor that did his flesh suffer decay. This Jesus God raised up again, to which we are all witnesses. Therefore, having been exalted to the right hand of God, and having received from the Father the promise of the Holy Spirit, he has poured forth that which you both see and hear. So Jesus is the one who poured forth the Holy Spirit as a result of God giving him that authority to do so. And so there, look at this. Therefore, let all the house of Israel know for certain that God has made Jesus Lord and Messiah, Jesus, the one who was crucified. So your question is, if I'm not mistaken, is this: how does that relate to Jesus being God and man, specifically the oneness and Trinitarian view? Well, so if I'm understanding your question correctly, how would a oneness modalist person interpret that? Or how would a Trinitarian interpret that? From my perspective, which is biblical Unitarianism, there's no issue here. Jesus is not literally God, so he is the Son of God. He is a being that is separate from the one God, and it is the one God who is the Father who put Jesus in that position. Jesus died, was crucified, was killed, but then he was able. God raised him from the dead and seated him at his right hand, gave him all power and authority, and gave him the authority to pour out the Holy Spirit and be working through his disciples in that way. So from a Unitarian perspective, of which the position I hold, there's no issue. That makes perfect sense. It's a very Unitarian way of looking at it, actually. It's more evidence for the Unitarian position. From a modalist oneness perspective, I got to tell you, I have no idea. Because from a oneness modalist perspective, there is only one person who is God, so the Father is the same person as Jesus, unless I'm misunderstanding that doctrine or that way of understanding it. But I think that's what modalism is, oneness theology. So I just genuinely don't understand how they would make sense of that. It doesn't make sense. As far as I can see, there are two persons. There's the Father and there's the Son, Jesus, and the Father is doing things for the Son, right? So at least the Trinitarians understand that there is a distinction between the Father and the Son. We agree on that. Unitarians and Trinitarians agree on that. The issue is the Father, who is described in the Bible as the only true God by Jesus in John 17:3, how can that be true? But then also Jesus being literally God. And so the conundrum or the conflict or paradox is resolved by understanding that Jesus is not literally God, that Jesus is Jesus is the one that God brought into existence and is the Son of God. And because of his faithful obedience and everything that happened to him, God raised him from the dead and gave him that authority. I apologize if that's not a great answer to your question, but that is sort of what I see as how to make sense of that verse. Sorry, I just lost my looking at the stream here. Let me just get back. I want to make sure that I'm following your comments there. I am still very new to this whole idea of live streaming, so I appreciate your patience. Okay. Yeah, so I hope that answers your question. Just very succinctly, that verse and that whole passage doesn't make sense from a oneness or Trinitarian perspective. It makes a little more sense from a Trinitarian perspective, because at least there's a separation of persons between the Father and Jesus. But I think, and this has been my position ever since I became a biblical Unitarian, that I think the Unitarian position and interpretation of that passage makes more sense. It doesn't have any logical contradictions to it. Okay, the person who asked about the all foods clean has referenced Romans 14. Thank you for referencing that. That is relevant to the discussion. And so what I will do, because I'm not 100% sure, and I don't know if we have the time to get into it right now, and I want to get to some of the other questions, stay tuned for the next live stream, which I'm not sure exactly when that's going to be. I will get into a regular schedule eventually, but I'm still just sort of figuring this out. When I further answer your question about Mark 7:19, I'll also touch on Romans 14 for you as well. So I hope that'll be beneficial to you. Okay, let's see some of the other questions. And I just want to double check my Facebook, people on Facebook, to see if anybody has commented. Dave Pearson has commented, because I said, I'm doing another Ask Me Anything. Feel free to ask me about anything related to the Bible, theology, philosophy, politics, or any of my nerdy interests, such as DC Comics. And he said, DC Comics, like X-Men and cool stuff like that. And I'm going to say, yep. Though X-Men are Marvel. I told you. Such a nerdy thing to do, is to correct someone about which comic book company characters are from. DC Comics characters are characters like Superman and Batman. I like Marvel, but I'm more of a DC guy. It's not just because those are my initials. It's because I just like the characters more, though I certainly appreciate the Marvel characters and the media that comes out of it. Okay, well, no one else has made any made any comments or asked any questions in the current YouTube live stream, but I do have a couple of questions that people raised previously. Anna asked, actually, and Anna's my sister, for anyone who doesn't know. Anna asked, what is the mystery of the gospel? And it's a great question, and there is probably 2 or 3 things I could say about that, but let me just give you try to give you a succinct answer, because the one time where the Apostle Paul himself actually gives us a direct answer to that is in Ephesians chapter 3. I love the book of Ephesians. I've studied that book a lot, and so let's take a look at it here. I'll share that screen. Bring it up here. Oops, there it is. Okay, so take a look at this. Ephesians chapter 3. The translators include to be specific. So, but look at this. By referring to this, verse 4 in chapter 3, when you read, you can understand my insight into the mystery of Christ, the mystery of the Messiah, which in other generations was not made known to the sons of men, as it has now been revealed to his holy apostles and prophets in the Spirit. To be specific, that the Gentiles, the non-Jews, are fellow heirs and fellow members of the body and fellow partakers of the promise in Messiah Jesus through the gospel, of which Paul was made a minister. And the phrase mystery of the gospel is actually, if I'm not mistaken, in chapter 4. Let's see here. Okay, no, it's not. Let me see. Where is mystery of the gospel then? It's been a while. Let me just look it up here. It might be in a different book altogether, actually. Or is it in chapter 3, just earlier? Well, it is saying through the gospel, the mystery of Christ is this. So, these are referring to the same things, but I thought there was that phrase, mystery of the gospel, specifically directly in one of his letters. So let me just look it up again. Mystery of the gospel. It is in chapter 6 of Ephesians. I knew it was in Ephesians. Mystery of the gospel. So he's saying here, with all prayer and petition, pray at all times in the Spirit, and with this in view, be on the alert with all perseverance and petition for all the saints. Pray on my behalf that utterance may be given to me in the opening of my mouth to make known with boldness the mystery of the gospel, for which I am an ambassador in chains, that in proclaiming it I may speak boldly as I ought to speak. Mystery of the gospel. So what does that mean? And again, there's probably more to it, but at least it's referring to this idea that the Gentiles are fellow heirs and fellow partakers, fellow members of the body, fellow partakers of the promise. So we're looking at verse 6 in particular. And I'm going to cheat a little bit here and go to the NIV because it slightly paraphrases it and it allows us to see exactly what we're talking about here. This mystery is that through the gospel, the Gentiles are heirs together with Israel, members together of one body, and shares together in the promise in Messiah Jesus. So through the gospel, the Gentiles are heirs together with Israel. Now, what this is saying is, because you have to understand at that time, the common view among the Jewish people, and this would have included Paul before Jesus revealed this to him, that there was no place for Gentiles among God's people. Maybe they could learn, maybe they could be persuaded to convert to Judaism and become legally a part of Israel, and therefore share in the gracious blessings that God had bestowed upon his people. But they couldn't obtain those blessings simply as a Gentile, simply in that position that they found themselves in. But what was revealed to Paul in particular, and what is so misunderstood, is that with the coming of the Messiah and what he accomplished and the message that was proclaimed about him as a result, now anyone in the entire world can be a part of God's people without having to become Jewish and be literally or legally a part of Israel and to live as Jewish people. And this was the great conundrum and revelation that they had to wrestle with. The apostles did, and they did in Acts chapter 15. That this is something that they declared, that Gentiles, non-Jewish people, can actually be a category unto themselves. That's maybe, I don't think I've ever put it that way, but that is in a nutshell what Acts 15 is talking about. That you can have the category Israel and being Jewish and all that entails, all the commandments that go along with that. But now there can be a separate but equal category, right? And that is the Gentiles. And that's not a dirty word. I've heard people say that we shouldn't call ourselves Gentiles. It's literally just the Greek word that means nations. And guess what? If you're not Jewish, then that means you're from the nations, right? My parents were born in Italy, and so that makes me Italian, right? I'm Italian by ethnicity, but I was born here in Canada, so I'm also Canadian by nationality. So I'm an Italian Canadian. That's who I am. There's nothing wrong with that. It doesn't make me less of a person just because I'm not physically Jewish. I have a mind, and God has illuminated my mind, and that's what Paul talks about in Ephesians chapter 2. That what or I think he talks about it in chapter 3 as well. Where does he say about the mind of the Gentiles has been illuminated, no longer in darkness? Let's see here. Is it chapter 3? It might even be chapter 2, that famous passage in chapter 2. Let's see here. This is making me try to refresh my memory on a lot of passages that I haven't looked at in a while. Nevertheless, I know for a fact that there is a passage in I think it's Ephesians, somewhere in Paul's letters, where he's explaining that you have to think that, look, that yes, naturally, so to speak, because of where we came from, you have to put ourselves back in the day of the apostles. Non-Jewish people did not know about the God of Israel. They didn't know about righteousness and sin. But we have a mind just like Israel, just like the people of Israel, and our minds can be illuminated, and we can see that. So again, being a non-Jew, a Gentile, is not a problem. We are a part of the kingdom of God. And the cool thing is, I think, if I'm understanding the apostles correctly, the Jewish people have a special role to play. They have more commandments to keep, and that's a privilege. They have a role to play. They have identity markers that mark them out among the nations, and they're kind of like the priestly nation. That is what it's called. But the apostles also say that we're a part of the priestly nation as well. And Paul said it there in Ephesians chapter 3. Then that's the mystery of the gospel, or of Christ, of the Messiah, that we are fellow heirs, fellow partakers, fellow members of the body. So we are connected, but not the same. We are separate, but equal. And I think it's pretty great. And so maybe we'll do a whole other topic. Actually, I think there's another question. Thank you so much. And I apologize if I'm mispronouncing your name. Please feel free to spell it out for me. Bavensky. That's probably not right. I don't know if I pronounced the B or not. What language is that? Let me know, please. But the question is, are Christians sinning if they do not keep the Passover and Feast of Unleavened Bread this year, starting at sundown on April 8th, 2020? Now, the question of sin has to be defined and worked out for us to say if Christians are sinning. So if I can just be blunt, no, Christians, and I'm assuming you mean non-Jewish, Gentile Christians, are not sinning if they do not keep Passover and the Feast of Unleavened Bread. Because that is a commandment that was specifically given to Israel for them to keep, and there is that level of severity if not kept. It becomes almost a moral issue in that sense. But for non-Jewish people, especially if you're not in a Jewish context, a Jewish community context, then it's not an issue of sin. But please, just because it's not an issue of sin does not mean it's irrelevant or unimportant. I do think we would have to look at the history of it, the historical reasons why Christians en masse in general no longer observe Passover or celebrate Passover, even though we did at the beginning. That's a whole other topic. And why do we celebrate, I think rightly celebrate and commemorate the death and resurrection of the Messiah, but we do so at a different time and with a different name and with a whole bunch of, and for some people, a whole bunch of different traditions as well, and call it Easter, right? not to let the cat out of the bag, but I'm actually working on something, and I have to find the time to do it because I'm, like I said in the live stream on Monday, I'm quite busy. I'm a full-time pastor of a Church of God, General Conference Church, Glad Tidings Church of God. I'm a full-time husband and father. I have a wonderful wife and a toddler and a baby on the way. And I would love to do more writing and more studying. And in fact, this situation of the COVID-19 virus and having to work from home, it is presenting its own challenges. At the same time, it might be, this might be a way that I can actually focus on doing more teaching and more Bible related things. Certainly by live streaming like this, I'm able to do so in that way. So I'm working on something, hopefully soon, where I explain that even though I have a positive view of the Torah, that God's commandments are not done away with, and that includes the festivals like Passover and the Sabbath, that there is actually nothing wrong with Gentiles fully participating in Christianity and Christian life, because especially if you know what those things are and you have the right heart and the right intention, there's actually nothing wrong with it. Both can be good and both can be true. If you find yourself in a Jewish community or a Messianic Jewish community, then great. Then I would definitely encourage you to keep Passover. If you want to keep Passover in your home and do a Passover Seder, I encourage you to do so. I have, and if you want to remove the chametz, the leaven from your home and not consume it during that week, I encourage you to do that. I've done that in the past. It's been beneficial to me. It's been a blessing to me. It's not where I find myself right now. And that doesn't mean I'm against it. And it doesn't basically just means it's not a condemning issue. It's not sin for a non-Jewish person to not do it. But if you want to do it and it's something that especially will be a blessing to you, then go ahead and do it. And in fact, I can help you if your questions are simple and straightforward. I can try to help you. I don't know how much time I have, but I can certainly try to answer any Passover related questions that you might have, though I certainly am no expert. Okay, let's double check the stream again. You're welcome, Anna. Let's see here. Okay, I don't know if anyone else has asked any questions, but we did have one more question from somebody named Matthew, somebody I used to work with actually. Before I was a pastor, I worked at a call center in Niagara Falls, and we did customer support for iTunes for Apple. So that was a good. I'm very thankful for that job. It allowed me to listen to things while I answered emails, but it also allowed me to talk with the people around me while I worked. And Matthew and I used to talk about politics and the Bible and theology and things like that. His question is, are you still a libertarian? And he puts it that way, are you still a libertarian? Because when we used to talk, when we worked together, I was very much a libertarian and would talk about it often and would try to make the case for that political perspective. In fact, I would say that I'm a libertarian anarchist. So yes, I am still a libertarian. I'm still an anarcho-capitalist, meaning I believe in complete freedom. I don't believe that there is a moral role for the government, that there is no such thing as a moral monopoly on government, because government is force. Now, there are services that the government provides that are legitimate, and in a functioning, peaceful, prosperous society, we would have need for some of those services. And as I laid out in my latest episode of our podcast, Variologies, called Don't Tread on Morality, that in a free society, in a society without a central government, we would simply have competition as it relates to those services that we would need. For example, we would need to deal with evildoers, as I put it in the podcast, right? If we were to abolish the central government, the federal governments of our countries, and get down to more of a localized type or regional type setup, that wouldn't automatically or magically erase people doing bad things like murder and assault and theft and rape. And so we would need ways to figure out how to deal with those, how to, if not prevent people from doing those things, then to punish or get some kind of retribution for those actions. And so what would result is various different ways of resolving and dealing with those issues. The whole idea is that no one person or no group of persons are smart enough to magically solve all of society's problems, right? And because if that was the case, then we would just have a central government and we'd elect those people. But as you can see, that doesn't happen. Like him or hate him, Donald Trump is not great. Is not, what am I trying to say here? Like him or hate him, Donald Trump and the people in the Senate and in the House, like Mitch McConnell, who's the Republican senator, who's the majority leader, and Nancy Pelosi, and these people, and Joe Biden and Bernie Sanders, who are running for president on the Democrat side. And then here in Canada, we have obviously Justin Trudeau and the people and the Conservative Party and the NDP and so on. These are not our best people. And look, even if you did have the smartest, most reasonable, peaceful, loving people that you could find, they're not Jesus, right? And they're not going to have all the right answers. And so another way of saying my political position is no king but Jesus. When Jesus returns and he sets up society the way he's going to, then I will submit to that. I submit to Jesus. He's my king, right? But I don't have another king, right? So in the meantime, or like in the situation in which we find ourselves, I would want as limited or as small a government as possible, if not none, in a centralized, monopolistic, if that's a word, in a monopoly sense. I would rather us have more regional, smaller regions over which we can figure out how to have governance. And that way people who are like-minded can get together, and people who are not the same or don't have the same worldview can go somewhere else. I would happily, divide our country into a bunch of little countries if that meant that people who are like-minded could get together, and then we wouldn't have all the fighting that we have among ourselves. Look, there's no easy answer, but the simple answer to Matthew's question is yes, I'm still a libertarian. I believe that people should have the freedom to live their lives how they want. I don't think anyone has the moral right to prevent people from living how they want. But as a Christian and as people who believe in values and in virtue, we have a responsibility to ourselves pursue virtue and live out virtue, and to persuade others in that to live that way as well. But that's the difference, right? I have a responsibility to persuade people, but I don't have a right to force people. Otherwise, I would then be sinning, because force is the definition of slavery. When you enslave somebody, it's because you're forcing them to do things they don't want to do. So that's it in a nutshell. Okay, looking at the questions, and we're going to wrap up in about 5 minutes or so. I think a good hour of live streaming is a good idea. And so Bavensky asked, should Deuteronomy 22, verses 20 to 21, be enforced today by both Jews and Christians or just by Jews? Well, let me look up what Deuteronomy 22 is. Deuteronomy 22. That doesn't immediately come to mind for me. I'm not sure what that is, so I'll have to look it up. Verses 20. Let me screen share here again so that everybody can see. Okay. Okay, so let's just back up a little bit. The elders of that city shall take the man and chastise him. They shall fine him 100 shekels of silver and give it to the girl's father, because he publicly defamed a virgin of Israel, and she shall remain his wife. He cannot divorce her all his days. But if the charge is true and the girl was not found a virgin, then they shall bring out the girl to the doorway of her father's house, and the men of her city shall stone her to death, because she has committed an act of folly in Israel by playing the harlot in her father's house. Thus you shall purge the evil from among you. Okay, so I think, I don't have an opinion on that in particular, or a thought on that particular, but I have a thought on any of the laws in the Torah that have to do with, basically, and it kind of piggybacks off of what I was just talking about, and the idea that, in our society, do we have the right, to use that example, to convict someone of sexual immorality and then actually execute them? Now, to be very clear, this is in the context of a legal matter, right? The Torah is not saying, it's not talking about vigilante justice. It's talking about, holding people accountable in courts, in a court of law, and finding them guilty and then convicting them and executing them. But, and I don't even know to what degree historically this was ever even done. I know there's a quote from rabbinic literature, if I'm not mistaken, that says that any Sanhedrin, I can never remember how to say that, the Supreme Court of Israel, if they ever executed anyone more than once every 7 years, that they were evil or they were corrupt or something like that. The idea here is that those, to actually get to that point where you have a society that is actually enforcing that kind of parts of the Torah, that is almost unthinkable. So to answer your question more specifically, that's speaking of a situation in which you're part of Israel, so it does not apply as a law, as a matter of being tried and convicted and executed among Gentile Christians. That's not the issue. So this would only be within the confines of a Jewish court, and I'm no expert in Talmudic or Jewish law, so I don't know exactly how that would work out. But I'll just give you my opinion and take that for what it's worth. I don't believe until the Messianic era that we should be enforcing any of those kinds of laws, because look, we each need to focus on ourselves and our own pursuit of virtue and our own morality. Jesus himself said, "He who is without sin cast the first stone." In other words, and he also said, why try to point out the speck in someone else's eye when you have a log in your own eye, right? In other words, this is not something that we need to concern ourselves with. And it might even be a reflection of God condescending to the worldview or to the way of doing things in the ancient Near Eastern world and in ancient Israel. And it might not have ever been something that was to be ideally lived out or done. That doesn't mean that sexual immorality is kosher and is to be, it's not a concern. Of course it's a concern. It is definitely a concern sexual immorality, it can lead to all kinds of problems, and is certainly condemned as sin in the Bible. But the enforcement of sexual immorality, or to dealing with that, that's way beyond us. And I would strongly caution anyone who is saying that we need to, caution against somebody saying that we need to, pursue those laws in that way. Study it, read it, learn from it, but don't worry about whether or not that needs to be enforced. So, all right, it's 8 o'clock. So thank you very much. Let me just double check. Anyone else have any comments? I want to thank everybody who asked questions and who watched or listened. I enjoyed doing this. I'm going to do it again very soon, and probably on a more consistent basis. And oh no, is Dave Pearson putting down Batman? I don't think so. Batman is awesome, okay? Batman is the best superhero. Just not the lame, no superpower dead Batman, right? All right, well, I'm going to reply to him after the live stream is over. Anyway, thank you again for watching. If you would like to support me and the Theology's podcast, and the fact that I have this YouTube channel and website, you can support me by going to messianicniagara.com and clicking on the donate link and send a PayPal donation, and that would definitely help me to pay for some of the costs that go along with hosting and the equipment that I use. I would definitely appreciate that. Any amount will be helpful. It's not my job. I have a full-time job, and I'm not looking for anything huge. I'm just looking for some, if I have provided you with any value, maybe you can just throw me back some value that way. But anyway, thank you so much. I'm Dan Calcagno. I'm going to do this again soon. I hope you have a great night, and God bless. I'm going to end the stream now.